Everyone, welcome to Blight Now. My name is Mike Blight. This video we will talk about the competitive ruling with Renegades, which is a very complex topic that requires a lot more than the length of this video to go into. And so I'll provide a bunch of links in the description below for you to do some of the research yourself. But in general, I want to talk about four major points that have come about as a result of this particular topic. I want to first and foremost explain the situation in the background for those of us who maybe are not as familiar with it. Two, I want to talk about sort of the role of team ownership and player welfare, what player welfare even means. Third, I want to talk about this notion of collusion and competitive integrity. This is something that I feel as though is probably the underlying most important part of all of this. And fourth and finally, discuss all the players that are interacting with each other within this, especially when it comes to the esports law and things like that, and how the system currently functions and how perhaps we might want to make some amendments to the ruling and the ability to respond and appeal some of the grievances. So to start it all off, frame the context. Renegades received a competitive ruling, again, link in the description below, that they are being forced to sell their spot. Now, if we go back a year's time, the previous owner of Renegades is Chris Badawi, pronunciation. I apologize for butchering that. So from this point on, we're just going to refer to him as Chris. Came into the esports scene working with Steve of Team Liquid, and there's a whole expose talking about it. Again, link in the description regarding Steve and his relationship with Chris. But essentially what it came down to was the involvement. At some point, Steve decided to part ways with him and say, hey, thank you for your time with or on Team Liquid. See you later. Good luck with esports or whatever, however the conversation unfolded. And it turns out, and Steve, rightfully looking after his team's best interests, reported to Riot Games that there was some tampering or maybe even some poaching of his players, two players, and specifically Keith and Quas, at that time of Team Liquid. And as a result of it, Riot Games enforced a one-year ban on Chris for his tampering, because that's a big no-no. You can't just be involved with the team and start to talk to the players behind the management's back and say, hey, look, when you what about joining our team, and we'll pay you X amount of money more because we know how much they're offering you now and what contracts are in place. So any type of organization, there's certainly HR in place for this. Professional sports teams, professional organizations in general, you simply cannot do that. Issued a one-year ban, and one of the contingencies within this ban was that he had to relinquish all control, all management, coaching, everything that had to do with TDK, Team Dragonites, and Renegades, in order for them to actually participate in the LCS, because at the time, TDK was LCS team and Renegades was a challenger team. Okay, so all that sort of on the place. Now what we're being faced with is allegedly Chris had never, or had maybe sort of reappeared in the scene, had never fully relinquished all of his control of the team. And as a matter of fact, one of the managers had said that once his one-year ban was lifted, he was going to be giving back the 50% of the team that he's owed, because it's sort of this joint partnership with these people, which goes against Riot's policy to decide, hey, look, we gave you a one-year ban, we told you no association. Turns out, behind the scenes, you've been colluding and saying that you'll have 50% of the team back. So we're just going to permanently ban you from all things League of Legends, and we're going to chop down all the other members of the Renegades team as well, including a one-year ban on the person who offered him 50% of the team back, and MonteCristo, who separately is still able to cast OGN and all those things. And there could be an entire video talking about the rift that's being developed between Monty and Riot Games, mostly because of the salary issue for the broadcasters and things like that. But for another video, not part of this particular Renegade situation. So that's the situation as it stands. Permaban for Chris, who colluded in the first place, didn't learn his lesson, kept tampering, gone. The person who promised the 50% and Monty both get a year. You can have no association with a LCS or league sanctioned team. Okay, so that's the first part. We know the situation. The second part here, we look at the idea of team ownership, and more importantly, this idea of player welfare. And player welfare, as we've seen come out Players like Maple Street, Remilia, Crumbs, Alex Each, RF Legendary, Selfie, all the players, and I think Selfie tagged Ku in the post as well on Twitter. All these players who have been around the team have talked about their mental and physical health, that in no way were they in any harm's way. The management comes up to that. Monty comes up to that and says, I have never heard of anything involving player welfare being at risk. And unless we have some serious Stockholm Syndrome, multiple people, quite literally 5 to 10 people who are coming out and saying they did nothing to physically harm us in any way, I'm obliged to think that that's true. Now, does it warrant more investigation? Of course. We cannot say with absolute certainty, just based on hearsay, even though it involved these people, that this is exactly how it is. So we need to investigate that a little bit further, have interviews with these individuals, but I'm going to assume that everything is fine. But if we link back to the idea that Chris was still involved with some of the managing decisions and sort of this looming dark shadow, the I'm not supposed to be here type figure, I can imagine what type of maybe emotional stress on top of just being a League of Legends player in the championship series might make you experience. So that part I definitely get. When we take it a step further, we think about this idea of collusion and competitive integrity, and how these exchanges that happen between TDK and Renegades are suspicious. Now, when the initial trade of Seraph and Ninja for Flares and Alex each came through the system, it was initially approved by Riot Games, and according to the management team, Matt and MonteCristo, they had never heard ever since that trade that there was any problem. So I think it's safe to assume that situation, if we put in for the trade was approved, we're all paying the people that are performing whatever task we need from them, that everything's okay. But maybe it's not, because as we're finding out now, the competitive ruling involves this idea of competitive integrity. Now, I will tell you from a fanship and viewership perspective, it really sucks to see a team that has continuous turnover happening over and over again. It's hard to root for them, especially when they're at the bottom of the pack as a team like Renegades. Now, as it turns out, the trade for Seraph and Ninja actually sort of rejuvenated the team, and they played extremely well. They actually surged, I think, from 10th place to 8th place during this time after the trade had occurred. But from a viewership standpoint, it is hard for us to get behind it. We see this huge import coming in Freeze, which is great, and then we see him then disappear into H2K. So a very temporary split. A lot of this has to do with the contracts that are being established by these people. But the final talking point is this idea of the appeal system and how information is being presented to the different individuals who are involved in this. And we have Bryce Blum, and I'll just call him up by name because he's the esports law or esports lawyer via Twitter. So he is sort of the chief appeal system, or the person that talks about appeal systems the most. And he went on to say a couple of very interesting lines that, and I'll quote this directly, that we continue to operate in a broken system where Riot acts as a judge, jury, and executioner. They write, interpret, and enforce laws with no third-party input or transparency, and he doesn't know for sure if the result of this competitive ruling is accurate. Now, I certainly understand the sentiment, and as a full disclaimer, I took the LSAT, I didn't go to law school, so I cannot speak on the legality of the situation. I only know this from circular communication and an observational perspective as someone who has literally followed the game since beta and played it. One of the issues is that instead of us trying to unite the parties, right, in a perfect world, we'd have Riot Games sitting down. It would be Riot, it would be Renegades / TDK, whoever the involvement is that's not named Chris, because he shouldn't be there, and he's never going to be there because of the perma ban. Not indefinite ban, perma. He's just gone. And then a third party to mediate the relationship there. Now, I've done a bunch of mediation research, and actually, from an HR negotiation standpoint, I've had to remove employees as well. When employees violate contracts that we have in place, we have to unfortunately remove them. Now, for him to say that we're operating in a broken system makes me feel a little bit Matt Murdock of Daredevil, which is not a good place to be, because the hope is that we can move closer to have these parties unite. Now, when we use language like that, when we say we're in a broken system, that inherently means that we need to fix the system before we can have any type of dialogue, that no matter what we do or say, that everything is wrong in some way, regardless of if the actual result is right or not. Now, if you look at the time frame that was provided, it actually is similar in terms of the language the language of Chris's original ban, where he said that he had just found out. He had said, "I'm reading this for the first time with you. I'm just floored at the injustice and randomness of this ruling." He said within his initial ban, his first ban on June 24th of 2015, that he had no idea that he was being banned. He thought he was in the right. Unfortunately, thinking that you're in the right and being in the right are not synonymous with each other. Sometimes you make very poor decisions. Monty says that he was only told of the ban 30 minutes before the post went out. There's no time to respond to any of that information, and let's just operate under the assumption that that part of this ruling is true. That Monty did not have any time to sit down and articulate an idea. Say, hey, look, I know you're trying to ban us or have this competitive ruling about these three things. Let me provide you with information to the contrary. I'm assuming that Riot Games had enough information, they came to enough of a conclusion that they decided, hey, look, we're going to enforce this, and after the fact, okay, reactively, you can present us with information. Now, that is far from a perfect system. As a matter of fact, I think that approach to handling these situations is perhaps wrong in a lot of ways. And so what we need to think about is, how do we handle these situations proactively? Do we, assuming that we are Riot Games, do we have to continue to give you a couple of warning before the punishment? And if so, how far in advance do you have to sort of defend yourself and respond to any of the allegations that are posted? For instance, if we have allegations that are made by a third party that there is some sort of collusion, in most situations, most professional settings, we at least give that person an opportunity to respond to it, to appeal the system, so that the grievance itself isn't just taken at face value. As a matter of fact, when there are serious repercussions like losing your LCS team slot, very similar to, let's say, losing your life and going to prison, there's usually a set defense that is presented where both parties present information, and a third party, if willing, is able to make a decision based on the rulings and policies that are in place. On the topic of rulings and policies that are in place, there is some value or maybe some truth to the idea that Riot Games does indeed act as the judge, the jury, and the executioner, although language is a bit extreme for my particular taste. They are the ones who control the LCS, or the ones who decide who gets to come in and out, and they're the ones who are forcing the sale of this team. Now, one problem with the intellectual control that Riot Games has is League of Legends is theirs. They get to do whatever they want with League of Legends, and they get to make decisions that they feel are in the best interest of the company. Now, if this is a slight at MonteCristo, like a lot of people are suggesting because of the broadcasting stuff, I don't buy it. I don't think a company as a whole is that petty to make that decision. But instead, we have to figure out, what do we do moving forward proactively, and instead of doing it reactively, to make sure that these situations don't unfold in such a negative way. So again, this is far from a comprehensive view of what happened entirely. Instead, we just have to think about, how do we handle these conversations moving forward? How do we make it so that teams can't just pick and trade players whenever they see fit, like we saw with TDK and Renegades? We have to think about player welfare in general. Are they actually experiencing some sort of frustration or stressor as a result of this figure who shouldn't be there, who's actually banned by Riot Games, hiding in the background? Whether that's the case or not, I guess we'll find out. And ultimately, yeah, I do agree that the appeal system needs to be looked at. We need to figure out how it is that we, moving forward, are able to make sure that all parties have their best interests sort of examined. The players, the organizations, and Riot Games as a whole. All three parties are responsible for each other as a way to not just protect their best interests, but protect the interests of other people. Riot Games doesn't want their players to be unhappy and going on weird Twitter rants. Neither do the organizations or the sponsors of those organizations. Everyone needs to be collaborative in some way and make sure that they're happy. And if not, well, the system kind of breaks and falls apart. Thanks for listening. I'm sure you have plenty of responses if you made it to the end of this video. Make sure to like and comment below, subscribe to the channel. Tweet at me, whatever it is that you feel is the best way of expressing yourself in a productive way. Let's figure it out, and then based on that, the comments and the reactions, we'll figure out the next steps, hopefully as a group.